And we're beginning chapter 16 of Barry and the Boys, the CIA, the Mob, and America's Secret History by Daniel Hopsicker. Things ain't always been just right down here. Late June is the time of the year in Louisiana when the Spanish moss hangs limply in the heavy air. And it was no surprise when Saturday, the 26th of June, 1969, dawned hot and humid in the muggy swamps of New Orleans, so hot that even the live oaks dotting the antebellum oak lawn plantation home outside of Clinton were letting their branches droop to the ground. On the airstrip adjoining the property, a small private plane made a poor takeoff, narrowly missed a tree while struggling to gain altitude, and went into a nosedive, plummeting to earth from 100 feet in the air. 2 men were killed instantly. One, the pilot, Jerry Sylvester, was Louisiana Teamster boss Edward Grady Parton's strong-arm man in Clinton. Just before turning into charred flesh in the burning wreckage, Jerry had been talking to investigators for Jim Garrison's probe about CIA agents and international trade mart exec Clay Shaw, who had been seen in Clinton with David Ferry and Lee Oswald in the feverish months before the Kennedy assassination. He could tell you who Shaw knew in Clinton and why he was there. A local informant had muttered darkly to a Garrison staffer. Garrison had been successful in tracking down numerous witnesses who had seen Oswald and Ferry together during the summer before the assassination, in addition to the eyewitnesses' sighting of the 2 men in military fatigues carrying automatic rifles in military training maneuvers in Lacombe. Witnesses saw them together at a private party where they discussed a coup d'etat against the Kennedy administration at a local New Orleans amusement park, in the Napoleon House bar in the French Quarter, and at a political meeting in Barry Seal's hometown, Baton Rouge. Oswald and Ferry traveled extensively together that summer. 6 separate witnesses testified they saw them both in the company of Clay Shaw and Clinton, a subject about which Jerry Sylvester was talking just before he died. According to the brother of Sylvester's passenger who perished, even though he hadn't babbled about anything, even the fact that Jerry Sylvester had cleared his meeting with Garrison's investigators with Grady Parton beforehand wasn't enough to keep his plane airborne. Sylvester had told investigators that he'd checked with Ed Parton before talking to them, and that he would tell Parton what we discussed because he doesn't want to do anything to hurt Parton. Gary's investigators assured him all they were concerned with was Clay Shaw. Gary Patrick Hemming had this to say about people who talk. Your card that keeps you alive may be that you're keeping quiet, or if you aren't keeping quiet, that you're giving out wrong answers that satisfy the people who are going to let you live. Sylvester's death, which illustrates the fact that there is a large cast of characters in the Louisiana contingent of the Kennedy assassination drama, became more interesting after we had learned that Barry Seal was a close associate, as they say, of Grady Parton's, the undisputed lord of Local Number 5 of the Teamster Union in Baton Rouge, and whose hiring hall was a hangout rivaling any mob social club in Queens. Barry's childhood friend and smuggling buddy James Poach told us Barry was hanging out with Grady Parton's all during this time, 62 and 63. We used to live together in Barry's mother's, Mary Lou's, spare bedroom, and he was involved as usual in all sorts of strange things. I remember, for example, helping him figure out how to drop 50,000 political leaflets over Baton Rouge with pictures of apples with a worm in them. It got a guy named Apple Sanders unelected from the state senate that year, as I recall. What football is to Nebraska, state politics is to Louisiana. a contact sport, one in which Barry Seal was engaged at Grady Parton's behest. An old Louisiana Teamster official confirmed Barry's friendship with Grady, telling of Seal's frequent appearances at the Teamster local. Hell, back then we was king in this state, Butch McCown told us. We ruled this state back then. Who is the we Butch is referring to? Clearly, we need to learn more about Grady Parton. In 1967, at the height of the media smear campaign against Garrison, led by Henry Luce's spear carriers, at Time and Life, Edward Parton was featured prominently in a Life cover story about David Ferry and the goings-on in New Orleans. I'm a Teamster, and some people think a hard one, Parton told the magazine. I've been in fights and jails and packed a gun, and I've been shot twice and knifed once. I joined the Marines but hit an officer and went to the brig on bread and water. At once I helped roll a sailor. They put me in front of a summary court and gave me a bad conduct discharge. Exactly the right credentials needed for a quick rise to the top of the Teamsters. Parton, who in between knife fights did 3 years in the Washington State Reformatory, joined the Union in the early 1950s and moved to Baton Rouge. After Kennedy's assassination, Irving Davidson, a Washington lobbyist, Lansky associate, and Washington public relations man doing business with government officials in Israel and Latin America, told the FBI that he had heard there was a photograph of Parton in the presence of Jack Ruby. So had there been a place card reading, Edward Grady Parton at the table of those sharpening their knives for Kennedy? Parton knew Ruby and perhaps even Oswald, according to Professor Peter Dale Scott, through their common activity, smuggling gums to Castro. Are you aware that Parton was under investigation for smuggling weapons to Cuba? Asked an attorney of character witness for Parton during one of the Hoffa trials, which were the battlefield upon which Bobby Kennedy fought his losing war with organized crime. I was right up there on several occasions when they were loading the guns, Parton admitted about his Cuban gun running. Hoffa was directing the whole thing. The solicitousness of so many political Americans in making sure that Castro had enough weapons to defend himself is, even 40 years later, truly astonishing. Without a doubt, Fidel Castro, thanks to the CIA-Mafia alliance, was the best armed communist dictator ever to run afoul of the United States. Parton's account of the Teamster assist to organized crimes, weapons smuggling to Castro implicated Union officials William Presser and Irving Davidson, who we have just seen as been trying to implicate him. Grady Parton had taken very seriously the possibility after Garrison began his investigation of David Ferry that he too would be ensnared in the probe through a story being told that Ferry had once been his pilot too. What were Barry Seal's ties with Grady Parton? We visited a savvy native for a quick tour of the Louisiana political swamp, and Bill Mau, veteran TWA pursuer and friend and associate of Barry Seal's, took us into his confidence during a long lunch at a riverside French restaurant located in the dark depths of Arcadia, or Acandiana. Over crawfish estouffee, he gave us a short course of the arcane relationships between political power centers in the state of Louisiana. I remember one of Mr. Hoover's assistants by the name of John Sullivan came to New Orleans and spoke at the American Legion. Mao began speaking about former FBI agent John Sullivan, a Bannister imitate, who died soon after the assassination. Sullivan used to talk to Judge Leander Perez, who was very concerned about the activities in New Orleans, explained Mal patiently. Now Leander controlled Plaquemines parish. Ye understand, and even though there was a state law on the books against gambling in Louisiana, there is only one road in and out of Plaquemines parish, and Leander controlled it, and Leander dearly loved his slot machines. But when McKeithen was elected governor, he appointed a certain Colonel Grevenberg to head the state police, and with orders to show the flag in Leander's parish and take care of the slot machines. Mao smiled. Grevenberg proceeded to go down there to take care of the slot machines, but very soon found himself more or less literally on his butt, with Leander looking down at him, saying, "Stay the hell out of my parish," and Gravenberg did not go back. Well, into the modern era, we had just learned the head of the Louisiana State Police was unwelcome in parts of the state. Miles said Barry Seal's first helicopter came from Leander Perez. That didn't mean Barry Seal really knew Leander. He didn't know Leander. If you weren't family, you didn't know Leander. Another Leander Perez associate was George Singleton, according to the House Select Committee. Mr. George Singleton was close to Judge Leander Perez in the fight against integration. Bannister's partner Joseph Oster testified, and he and Guy Bannister were also close friends. Singleton wrote for the Citizens Council and Colonel Bufford Balter. Mr. Singleton, Mr. Stewart, and others around Mr. Bannister were interested in ultra-conservative politics. Alvin Cobb was also a friend of Bannister. Mr. Cobb was a supporter of the KKK. The informant whose whisperings put Jerry Sylvester into a dive at the opening of this chapter lived next door to Alvin Cobb's brother, Lloyd Clay Shaw's superior at the International Trade Mart. We have seen receipts from Barry Seal's Helicopter Airways in the 60s, which at that time housed itself in Clay Shaw's International Trade Mart. In 1973, James Earl Ray swore that he had provided his attorneys with 2 telephone numbers given to him by his mysterious CIA handler, the anti-Castro Cuban who Ray was only ever able to identify as Raul. Predictably, Ray had first met Raul in New Orleans, sister city of intrigue in the North Montreal. Ray told the Atlanta Journal, "Look, I know the telephone numbers of 2 men in Louisiana. The authorities could have got their names. One of those 2 numbers Ray knew rang into a line controlled by Edward Grady Parton. This all came into sharp focus one day in conversation with Southern lawman Rex Armistead. Gray Parton had been a part of the infamous Murder Incorporated. Jews, along with another Louisiana mobster named Onofrio Pecora, he told us. Armistead, who believes his own book, had spent the late 70s as head of a multi-agency organized crime task force in New Orleans. I wonder if that's a typo. It has to be. New Orleans. You know, he once informed us casually, things ain't always been just right down here. During the 2-year-long investigation, this was hands down the most true thing we heard. Bit of a short chapter today.